The feminist movement is a big piece of Italian history that is comprised of many parts. One of the main ways feminists expressed their concerns were through strikes. Female workers participate in large strikes in the hot autumn of 1969 that involved 5 million workers. When Elena is on her book tour, she goes to see Maria Rosa, who is protesting with a student group. On page 73, Franco says, Elena is asking what there is to do. Maria Rosa answered cheerfully, the revolution. So I assumed a mocking tone. I said, and in your free time? This interaction shows how big of an undertaking the feminist movement was. Another important strike happened in Paris during the month of May 1968 that was discussed in the New York Times article we read. The quote says, the left mounted a huge march of solidarity with students who reoccupied Sorbonne. Workers began occupying factories. Within another week, France was closed down by the general strike that revolutionaries had always dreamed of. One of the outcomes feminists hoped would come from these strikes was better access to birth control and birth control education. The banner in this picture translates to say, we are not machines for breeding, but women fighting for the revolution. On page 194 of the book, Elena goes with Leela to the doctor for her heart murmur. But while they are there, Leela also attempts to inquire about birth control pills. The doctor says, in your condition, pregnancy would help. There is no better medicine for a woman. And then Leela replies, I know women who were destroyed by pregnancy. Better to have the pills. The 1971 abolition of law forbidding birth control information was very significant to this instance in the book. If the abolition of the law hadn't happened, then Leela wouldn't have even been able to access information about these pills.
Another practice of the feminist movement was fighting back against sexual harassment in the workplace. Ferrante represented this when Leela spoke at a meeting of the committee. She held Gennaro and talked about her experience at the sausage factory. On page 122, Leela says, the women in the workplace have let their asses be groped by supervisors and colleagues without saying a word. If the owner feels the need, someone has to follow him into the seasoning room. His father used to ask the same thing, maybe also his grandfather, and there, before he jumps all over you, the same owner makes a tired little speech of how the odor of salami excites him. Women were considered objects of men, and they were fighting this injustice. Another thing that changed a lot in Italy with the feminist movement was the inclusion of women in politics. According to the reading on Italian feminism, in the 1960s in Italy, politics was almost exclusively the domain of men. The student movement in 1968 had seen more young women taking part in politics than any time since 1945. Ferrante addresses this in Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay. When Sylvia, Maria Rosa, and Elena are at the rally, they were talking amongst themselves about the speaker, and they waited for Franco and Juan to intervene. On page 75, the book says, the result was that we found ourselves, we three women, in the situation of drowsy heifers, waiting for the two bulls to compete their testing powers. Women were starting to voice their opinions in politics more, but their voices were still scarce compared to men. Women were not prominent in politics in this time because their place was considered to be in the home and in taking care of the family.
On page 106, Leela describes all the responsibilities she was assumed to have just because she was the woman of the house, such as taking care of Gennaro, making the beds, keeping the house clean, washing and ironing the baby's clothes, Enzo's and her own, making lunch for the three of them, leaving little Reno at the neighbors with 1,000 instructions, hurrying to the factory and enduring the work and the abuses, then coming home to devote herself to her son, also the children that Gennaro played with, making dinner, the three of them eating again, putting Gennaro to bed, while Enzo cleaned up and washed the dishes, returning to the kitchen to help him study, something that was very important to him, and then despite her wariness, she didn't deny him. The Italian women's movement 1968 to 1978 was important because it had the new family law that asserted that equality of the partners within the family was important and the recognition of the wife's domestic labor, the duty of holding property in common, and the equal contribution of partners to the maintenance of the family. Children, however, are still required to take their father's name.
The Italian feminist movement had many trials, but because of the efforts of these women, there were many successes, and women today have more rights and respect, which they can attribute to this movement.